everyone, and welcome to the Very Much So podcast. You know it's your girl. I am using a mic today. Shocker, I know. And I am also recording a book-ish episode today. Another shocker, I know. I have been doing some reading, baby. Shout out to @VeryMuchReading. I now have Instagram and TikTok. So Bookstagram and TikTok. For all of my reads, I have niched down and it has been fun to talk about books. It's also been really motivating me to set higher goals for the books that I read each month and honestly to read more interesting books. Baby, my March books exceeded my expectations. Today is April 1st, so I guess I'm going to say happy spring. I don't know if we celebrate in April Fool's Day over here, just with the state of the world. But it's good to be doing a new episode. Hope that y'all know, if you follow me on Instagram, in the stories, I've been talking about my journey to building my website, baby. And I have been very hard-headed and determined to produce for YouTube as well as to increase my content output. If you're new here, sorry y'all. I always give a little life update in the beginning of the episode. We're gonna get into the books, don't worry. As far as the website, it's very important for me to have it up on a deadline, and I'm going to keep the deadline to myself because I just need to work on it. And so with that being said, I've been increasing my content output with creating for each of my niches, right? Very much outside, very much reading, because I really didn't post at all on very much reading. Those who follow me on there know, I will always do when I finish a book and I keep track of my reading goals in my bio. I didn't really create fun content last year or just talk about the books. And fast forward to this year, we have a book club on Fable. Yes, that is right. You can join at the link in my bio. I'll also put it in the caption of this episode or the description of this episode, and it is a very low-key book club. And it's funny because every time I talk about the book club, people always ask if it's in person. I feel like my definition of chill is to not have not have to go somewhere and do it, but maybe that is getting out the easy way, and we all need community in that way, even when it comes to books. And so more to come on that later. Keaton, summer bucket list. That being said, I have been reading tons and tons of books. That being said, I am taking a pause off of YouTube content in just the hopes that y'all just listen to this audio episode, and that way I can still squeeze in some content, especially bookish content, and do audio episodes and still work on the website. Y'all know I will forever be the girly who just do too much, but honestly, my prayers lately have been for God to expand my capacity, which I feel like He has in a way. So I know that my to-do list and my output every week is well, how? But it's baby, it's God. And so here we are. So welcome to this bookish episode. I feel like I need a little song. Bookish, we bookish. Okay, I'm workshopping the song. But this bookish episode is about two books that are so similar, but also completely different. And they have a core to them that is just so similar. And I can't believe that I was reading them at the same time. My goal for March was to read 5 books. And I did it, y'all. I did it. The 5 books were, one was Evie Drake Starts Over. I had to say that so slow. I listened to that via audiobook. I was cleaning my house for a whole damn week and folding clothes. And so I needed something to be on in the background. Another was If Only for the Summer. That is by Alexandra Warren. It's kind of a spicy book. And it was a very light read. I was in not a book slump, but it got me more excited to read. It got me to okay, I want to finish that book type thing. Third was Good Dirt, and that was by Charmaine Wilkerson. I had started that book, I believe, a while ago, and then I picked it back up and started both reading it via iBooks and then listening to it on Spotify with audiobook. Because of the way the author tells the story, it's a lot of back and forth with the past, the present, the more recent past, all these things, and there are tons of different characters. But once it kind of got to chapter 5 or 6 or something, I was oh, okay, I see where this is going. And it was actually a really amazing book. It was about legacy and family, knowing your roots, and just really being proud of your family's history, reinventing yourself and starting over. So I would recommend that book definitely, as well as If Only for the Summer. And then the two books that we are going to talk about today that I read during March, one was Kin by Tayari Jones. That was released in February. And I love Tayari Jones. When I was in a book club quite a few years ago, we had read American Marriage. I love that book and I actually may read it again, but it got me into that author's writing style, and I've read like maybe 4 or 5 books from her since. A book that I typically recommend to people, even though it's not the lightest read, it just kind of has stayed with me all these years. It's called Leaving Atlanta. She did like a fictional story that was like grounded in a lot of the historical events that was actually happening in Atlanta with the young kids being kidnapped and sold into like sex trafficking. I also read this year The Untelling by her, which was heavy. And it irritated me in the sense that I just couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't believe what the characters were doing. That was another book that was based in Atlanta. Silver Sparrow. Did I read that? I think I read this. I'm not sure. But Kin, I say all that to say is when I saw that she had a new book and I ordered it maybe like the tail end of February. So it was like brand new. I was like, absolutely yes. Let me just read it. I don't really buy a lot of books outright, but I bought this one. You know, we are a huge proponent for going to the library over here, okay? Support that public library. Get them to order the books, the whole 9 yards. But I bought that book at the same time. Again, book goal for March was 5 books. I was reading this. This was a physical book, which I go to the library often, baby. Ask me how many of my library books I have actually read. Because sometimes I'll get a library book just to like do Bookstagram stuff, and then I'll read it on my phone. But I have a lot of physical books, even if I don't, have the book on my phone with the plans to read it, and then they get due, and then like, y'all know how that is. But it was like kind of challenging to like train myself to read a physical book again. And so what I would do is go on my walks. I like to take 3-mile walks. Don't ask me why it's 3 miles. It's just a good number for me. It's good to like get all the steps in, close that exercise ring, all those things. So I go on 3-mile walks and I would just like have that and have my little fanny pack. And then with Grown Women, and that book is by Sarai Johnson. She's actually a professor at Howard University. Spoiler, it was also a joy to read that book because for one of the characters, they were based in DC and they were a professor at Howard, and they wanted one of the other characters to go to Howard. And so I love when I'm reading a book and it's talking about the area that I'm in, places that I know, streets that I know, that type of thing. Grown Women is a book, like, I just finished it yesterday, like, literally, like, 11 o'clock at night, because I had ran out of audiobook hours, but I finished listening to it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this book is so, I want to say it's unreal, but it's really like the opposite. It's so real that I cannot believe that the author put those experiences into words. One, the book is called Grown Women. Kind of a recurring theme of that is like, of course, girlhood, womanhood, as well as motherhood. One of the things that really just like struck me, like hit me in my chest, was when one of the daughters, it's a book about daughters. I'm gonna tell y'all that before I get too much into it. She was like, oh, well, she's a grown woman. And then the other mother asked her, okay, but like, what does that mean? And then the character didn't know, and it's about how we view being a quote-unquote grown woman as a Black woman. You know what I mean? In our girlhood, in our womanhood, where does that distinction live between our girlhood and our womanhood? And so that book, to read it in tandem with Kin, they have so many similarities. So let's get into it. I'm going to introduce both books, tell y'all a little bit about each, and how I got to the point where I just was like, I got to have an episode talking about both of these because the themes are just so striking. Okay, so book overview. 1, for Kin. Kin is based in the South as well, in Louisiana, a place called Honeysuckle. So very small country town. There are two girls. One is Vernice, one is Annie. They are friends since birth. They call each other cradle friends. What they have in common is they don't know their mothers. Vernice's mother died when she was a baby. Her father killed her mother. Annie's mother left Annie, and she left Louisiana. Annie doesn't know where her mother is. She just knows that her mother left her. She is stuck with her grandmother, who has, by that time, she wasn't planning on raising any more kids. And then Vernice, comparatively, raised by her aunt, who just can't seem to do the mother thing right, just can't seem to say the right thing or to be the type of example that Vernice needs in her life as a mom, because she just wasn't planning for that. But she's trying her best. She's doing her best. Everyone is, to take care of these two girls, along with the community and everybody who's around to uplift them, from like the local bartender, the community doulas. They have a community around them. With Ken, you have these two characters, and they go on two completely different paths in life. Annie, and I'm really trying very, very hard to talk about these books without spoiling them, but one goes to college, so Vernice ends up going to college. She goes to Spelman. Annie goes on to look for her mom. Before I wrap up giving like a book overview of Ken, I will say that one of the largest themes in that book, again, it's called Ken, right? And so even though Vernice and Annie aren't blood necessarily, they are like the closest people in each other's lives. And there's a sisterhood there and a kinship there. No matter how much each of the other person's life changes, they have each other's backs, and they make decisions in what they believe is the best interest for their friend. Like, they are what we would say like ride or die. They ride or die for each other. No matter how much life changes, they are there for each other. They are each other's kin. And what they have in common is that they don't know what it is like to be mothered properly. And so you see them looking for their mother in other people, making decisions based on the fact that their mothers were not in their lives. There is this kind of void that they are looking to fill and that they know exists because they do not have their mothers. Grown Women is so interesting. Again, this is the book by Sarai Johnson. That book is based in Tennessee. It follows 4 generations of women who each had one child, and then that child had one child. And so you have these 4 generations who are essentially raising the youngest generation, helping to raise the youngest generation, while also healing their own mother wounds at the same time of trying to raise the youngest child. And her name is Camille. And so you have the great grandmother. Her name is Evelyn. We don't even meet her until later in the story. We have Evelyn's daughter, and her name is Charlotte. She gives birth to Corinna. Corinna gives birth to Camille. It explores generational trauma, girlhood, and mother-daughter relationships, in addition to what healing and self-discovery can look like. When I tell you, and I'm like, what else can I say about Grown Women? There's certain trauma related to how one of these daughters even got pregnant. There's trauma related to who they married and how they married. Again, how they got pregnant, who they got pregnant by, how that kind of set the path or course for their life, and like what they decided to do after. And we see each woman coming into her own. And one thing I enjoy about this book is that they take you to present day. They do like June 2010 and June 2012. Like, it goes up like that, but then they'll also take you back. And so we see how Evelyn got pregnant and what her life was like before she got pregnant, what she enjoyed before she got pregnant, how she was, how her mother was to her, who her husband was, what kind of wife she initially wanted to be, how she felt about being a mother to Charlotte. We see how Charlotte felt like her mother Evelyn had let her down in her childhood and how she struggled to forgive her. We saw how Charlotte got pregnant with Corinna and who she married, why she chose to stay, if she chose to stay, what kind of job she did, who her friends were during that time. Corinna growing up, who her friends were. We see them kind of dealing with life at the same time as navigating these relationships. And so there's loss, there's grief, there is a lot of drinking, a lot of like coping, and really trying to break the cycles of trauma while also being so deeply embedded in it, and also reliant on the people who may have caused the trauma, because, again, all of these women each had one daughter. They are each other's families. The men in this book are really like an afterthought. They are not a prominent factor to how a lot of these women live. I'm hesitant to say that, but the focus point is not the men or the men's impact in their lives per se. It's really about how these women are mothered, how they navigate motherhood, and the decisions that they make and how it affects their child. So when I tell you kin and grown women were so similar, to the sense that in kin you have Annie, who her mom left her, so she's looking for her mom. She hears around town that her mom had came back one day and she stopped at this bar. She goes to the bar and she's like pestering the guy who works there, who owns the bar, like, help me find my mom, help me find my mom. He eventually helps her, but she also kind of learns how to bartend. And that's a skill she carries with her as she is on this journey to find her mom and moving away from Louisiana. And then you have in grown women, one of the daughters, Corinna, is a bartender, and she marries somebody who ends up seeing like the value in her being a bartender. And so like making drinks and how she chooses like the flavor profiles and everything is like an undercurrent in her life for like a skill that she has. And so those two characters right there, Annie and Corinna, were so similar, because I'm like, this bartending thing. Okay. It was so interesting to me to see how Tayari Jones just kind of woven in what being a bartender looks like for, like, say, a 19-year-old girl versus like what being a bartender meant for, and I will also say what that looked like being a 19-year-old girl, like in Louisiana, in rural Louisiana, versus like Memphis. She eventually travels to Memphis, versus what it looks like in Tennessee and, DC. Another thing I felt was really similar, motherhood. The theme of motherhood, obviously in Grown Women, that entire book, it's about so much, but it got to a point when I was reading it where I was like, wow, like these are 4 generations of women helping to raise this one child, and like how blessed Camille was, that's Corinna's daughter's name, to, end up being helped and formed by her great-grandmother. And then her and her grandmother, Charlotte, had a really close relationship. And so part of the book then was Corinna kind of figured out how she fit into Camille's life, how she could kind of repair her wrongs from the past to have a positive impact on Camille, because she knew that like there was hurt there. And so you have Camille, who's surrounded by all of these mothers. You have Charlotte, whose mother, she's seeing, raise her granddaughter, and she's trying to also facilitate the relationship that her mother, Evelyn, has with her daughter, Corinna. And it's just, motherhood is just like everywhere. You see them grappling with trying to be a mother, dealing with the decisions they made as a mother. And then in Kin, you have these 2 young girls who are looking for a mother in everyone. At one point, Annie visits a whorehouse and becomes very close with like the pimp of it all, let's say. Her name was Lulabelle. And Lulabelle is telling her, they're writing each other letters, even though Lulabelle is constantly saying, like, I don't want to see you again. Like, I never want to see you again. Stay far, far away from here. Annie is like, no, she doesn't mean that. Like, when she looks at me, I feel warm inside, and I see how she takes care of me. And then she just ends up looking for her mother and everyone, to the point when even as she's working in the bar in Memphis, she's scaring customers, because every woman who comes in, she feels like that's her mother. You also have Vernice. She takes a very different path in life, and she ends up becoming a part of a family who her mother is teaching her the things that she wished her biological mother would. And so she's also learning, how to accept love in that way and be led in that way and be a student, really, catching up to all those years of never having a mother to overnight. Now you have a mother-in-law, and what does that mean? What does it look like? And so on top of motherhood being a big theme, the reason I appreciated motherhood being a big theme is because I don't feel like we talk about it enough. One thing that really gripped me about each book was that men were not the focal point. Romantic love was not the focal point. Healing became a focal point, period. And I'm just like, healing was a focal point. There's a part even in Ken where one of the characters gets married. I'm not going to say who. And even her husband is like, yeah, my mom loved me so much that she found me a wife. Sometimes I feel like my mother, this is the husband saying this, and my wife did a backdoor deal so that they could get each other. And I'm just playing the husband while you get to play and be the daughter, and now you have a mother. And that is from Ken. And I think that really speaks to, these women were with men. They were with men, they were dating, they losing their virginity, exploring their sexuality, all of the things. But with each of the men in their lives, the men had to deal with the void that their mothers left. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what it is to be loved. I need to get married in order to fill this void. It was none of that. The main thing that excited one of the characters about getting married was, again, having a mother-in-law and having somebody to support them, again, in the case of one of the characters in Ken, to find their mother. Spoiler, it got to be too much for one of the men. And so you can see in Ken the obsession that the girls have with replacing their mothers and or finding their mothers, and how much it actually put a strain on their relationships or brought other women actually closer to them because they could identify with what it meant to be a Black girl and have a mother. And whether it's by saying, oh, hey, like, you're looking for this girl, you don't need to be looking, you're looking for your mom, you don't need to be looking for nobody that don't want to be found. Or just, I understand you, boo. You're looking for your mom. I lost my mom too. Like, that's just so interesting to me because I never thought about, one, it's been a while since I read a book where romantic love was not the focal point. Motherly love was. And I think in the Black community especially, we hear so, like, of course, I feel like the mothers are like the bedrock of generations in the community. But to actually get insight into these relationships, into like the hierarchy, if you will, of mothers, and the mothers who stay, the mothers who leave, the kind of selfishness that can be embedded in either choice, and how it can affect you, how it can affect your relationship with yourself, with men, with your sexuality, with what you choose to do in life, and just kind of take a hold on you. I'm about to wrap up talking about Ken because something happens at the end. I would say one of the girls ends up having the opportunity to become a mother, and her choices continue to guide how she viewed that pregnancy, how she viewed even wanting to have that title and that role. And I think even though motherhood is so paramount in our cultures, to get such insight into the children that were left behind was intriguing. And then on the other hand, with grown women, to get insight in not only the children, but the mothers themselves, the mothers being mothers and children. So that duality in the sense that, like, yes, I'm your mother, and yes, I messed up, but I have issues with my mother, which is the case with Charlotte and Evelyn. Charlotte had issues forgiving Evelyn for what she allowed in her childhood. And with that being said, everything that Charlotte ended up pouring into Corinna, good and the bad, either Corinna didn't want to give her daughter Camille, or Corinna passed down to Camille. Either way, Corinna had to heal it. And I hope y'all can really pick up what I'm putting down. And again, please give me grace because this is my first time talking about books on here in a while, but with grown women and them examining these mothers as both mothers and daughters and having feelings and the choices that they make and just being sad and harboring unforgiveness and really carrying that generational, like, it's called generational trauma for a reason. And so getting into, even though Charlotte wasn't the best mom to Corinna, she was Camille's favorite person, to the point where Corinna, again, Camille's mom would call Camille, Camille would not answer. But if Charlotte called her, which is her grandmother, she would answer. And she would be able to tell her grandmother things that she could never tell her mom. It's like, even though Charlotte didn't have the opportunity to be a great mom to Corinna, she still got to see the joy in being a grandmother and showing up in that sense. And they each, Evelyn, Corinna, and Charlotte, were each impacting each other's motherhood throughout the entire story. And I was like, wow, we really have 3 generations in here learning from each other. And then Camille, I really appreciate her being the youngest generation because she ended up making a lot of decisions independent of what all of her mothers taught her. And, you know, she really started to think for herself and to really break some of those curses of, okay, this is expected of me. I have to do this because they want me to do this, versus this is actually what I want to do. And in turn, Corinna had to deal with allowing Camille to make those decisions. And we see this in the big decision of like going to college, as well as like the smaller decisions of, okay, you're going to have a boyfriend. Okay, you need to get on birth control. And it's like these very uncomfortable situations. You see them being fundamental in the overall relationship between mother and daughter. And so I really hope that makes sense, because it's such an amazing read in the sense that you don't really read stories like this when it comes to just Black womanhood, Black girlhood, and motherhood, and what it actually looks and feels like day in and day out. And at one point, Corinna ended up getting married. And again, men are not the focal point, but the men that your mother pairs with can have a huge impact on your experience as a child. And so, of course, it affected Camille. And baby, it's just some good reading. One other thing I'm going to say, kind of like switching gears, is how Ken and Grown Women were similar, because they each also touched on sexuality in a sense, because in each book, it was kind of the standard that like the expectation is you marry a man, you have a child, you get with the man. One of the characters, Vernice, in Ken, she ended up getting with somebody who struggled with and actually rejected the idea of heteronormalcy or heteronormativity. What is that word? Of heteronormative standards. And she was like, okay, well, you know, you don't have to be with the man. You don't have to have children. We can be together. We love each other. And Vernice was pretty much like, nah. Because again, she's striving for filling that void. And she knew that like romantic love in that sense was almost futile, because she's missing that love of a mother. And it's just so interesting, because the decisions that we make in terms of like who we have kids with, how we live our lives, who we marry, where we marry into, people make those decisions for different reasons. And we may look at somebody like, oh my gosh, why are you with him or why are you with her? And you just don't know what purpose that relationship is serving to the things that they need in their life. So that's a word right there. And so I thought that was so interesting, because she didn't even, again, I'm grappling the fact that like men were not a focal point, but again, like romantic love wasn't a focal point, because even in Ken, especially, like love definitely existed. And I will say also, Annie was in love with someone, and he ended up, I'm not going to spoil it, but she was in love with someone. So it was a part of the story. But again, I think it just made me think about the bigger reasons that we are with people and what it looks like, the trauma of leaving, also the practice of keeping like quote unquote healthy relationships in your life. Versus in Grown Women, one of the mothers ended up after a marriage, again, after a baby, she ended up being with a woman at the end of it. But it was like not even a discussion about her like liking women. It was just, in both of these stories, it's seen as very like, oh, okay. Yeah, so I would say, saying that out loud, I feel like romantic love was like a soft undercurrent of each book. And I think it's interesting how each author like touched on it or expounded upon it. Okay, that is my big spiel on why you should read both Kin and Grown Women. Y'all, please let me know how y'all like this episode. I tried really, really hard not to spoil it, but I think it is important to just talk about some themes. And the theme of motherhood, trauma, and love, and the different ways like your life can go raising one another, I felt like was too good not to touch on. And so I have Ken right here. I did bookmark a bunch of pages because like the way Tayari Jones wrote certain things I wanted to touch on. Let's see if I can do this here. Another thing I think is cool about Ken is that her and Vernice and Annie are like writing each other's letters. And there's also like an undercurrent a little bit just of the times when it comes to women rights and racism and things like that. Hold on. And one thing I'll also say about Grown Women is that even though each mother's relationship was very complicated, either with the daughters, granddaughters, whatever the case may be, they really had each other. And if something happened, they were on that plane, they were getting the ticket, they were there. Very, very interesting to me. Very like outstanding characters who were complex in their own way. And I'm thinking about like Corinna and her getting pregnant with Camille, and even the wisdom she was trying to pass on to Camille, because they did show the story of how, when she got pregnant, the father was like famous. And so he had a reputation to protect. So he ended up having to keep her hidden. And, that taught her a lot. And she was okay with it for a while. So it taught her a lot about what she was willing to accept in exchange for like love and attention. Until eventually she bossed up and did what she needed to do. Okay, what else we finna talk about? And lastly, I would just say read Ken if you want to read a good friendship story. And if you want to see two girls going down very different paths, but there is something still connecting them. Read Grown Women if you are prepared for a family's origin story in their future. That present, past, and future. Past, present, and future combo makes it go crazy with Grown Women. Very, very intriguing, interesting read. Just like blew my mind every part of the way. And so I am going to leave y'all with 2 other book recommendations in the order at which I think y'all should read them in. Dominion, a novel by Addie E. Sitchins, and then These Heathens by Mia McKenzie. Read Dominion first. I would suggest you read it on a audiobook because the chapter sequences and they're like, it's a churchy type of book, so they're playing like the tambourines, they're reading like the church announcements. It's very like, oh, okay, like it grabbed my attention. I think I finished reading it on my phone, but because I had ran out of audiobook hours, but I wish I could have read that whole thing on audiobook. That is engaging and fun from beginning to end. And then it also has more of a like darker side to it, because there is a villain in that book. Okay. There is a villain, baby. There is a villain. Versus These Heathens, you should definitely read immediately after Dominion, which shout out to the TikTok creator who recommended that. And These Heathens is funny. Like, it's funny, hilarious. If and when I do an episode about Dominion and These Heathens, we're going to talk about the one thread that a lot of the, and actually we could talk about it now, a big thread that a lot of the books I've read this year, they've been like Black woman centered, touching on Black girlhood, but they have involved pregnancy and or abortion. And it is so interesting to me how it keeps popping up, and the manner at which it's handled in each book is so different, y'all. So let me know if you want me to talk a little bit about that. But if I do that, I may have to spoil. I don't know. Maybe we do need to have an in-person book club, child. Anywho, thanks for listening. I'm going to leave y'all with a closing question. What makes you either excited or nervous about becoming a mother? What makes you, I'm going to write that down so I can put it in the notes. What makes you excited or nervous about becoming a mother. And yes, if you are new here, sometimes I be saying bye like 5 times, but we don't be in and out. It's like I'm about to leave your house, but I keep I keep setting my purse back down. And so I say all that to say, I asked that question because when I started doing some research on grown women, the author Sarai Johnson shared that she started thinking about these characters when she was family planning. And so she was thinking about herself as a mother, and then these characters kind of were birthed. And, the story of generational trauma and these different, 4 generations of women, love, hurt, healing, all of that. And I, as a 30-something-year-old Black woman, the topic of motherhood is so interesting to me because I feel like you talk to certain people and they are definitely like, oh, I don't want kids, or I have no problem being a stepmom, or I don't want a man with any kids. I want us to have our kids together. I need to get married before I have kids, or I just want a kid and maybe I don't want marriage. And it can go so many different ways. And to be honest, I feel like I am figuring out where motherhood even fits in my life, or believing that I do want to be a mom based on, I was taught to value, but I feel like the older I get, I'm like, is that still true for me? And of course, a lot of it also depends on the partner you have. And speaking for myself, a lot of it depends on, I know that in order for me to have a child, I'm going to need this type of partner, period. Also, the idea that, women are having kids a lot later in life, and there is less of the fear mongering with you need to do it by 35 or else. And of course, I feel like there is a pressure once you get to be in your 30s on not only settling down, but also to have a baby. And so they work in tandem. Like, I need to settle down so that I can have these babies. And I have absolutely felt that pressure prior to entering my 30s, actually. Now being in my 30s, I'm like, okay, well, what do I actually want? How do I actually want my life to look? What type of freedom do I want in my life? And what do I need to do to ensure that I have that freedom either before, during, or after, I have kids. And of course, kids are going to change everything, but how do I want my life to look? Talk at me. Make sure you're following that Very Much Reading and or joining the book club, because I will pose this question in there. Yeah, I really appreciate y'all for rocking with me. Please be gentle with me. This is my first bookish episode in a while, trying a new format. So appreciate y'all's patience. And yeah, love y'all. Toodles. Make sure you are reading. And what is your book goal for April? What's the book goal for April? My book goal for April is 3. If I read 3, I'm good. My book goal for the year is 35. And so currently I'm at 10. So yeah, anywho, I'm excited for how book things are going to live on the website. So thank y'all for listening. Bye.